Hey guys, tonight we drift into a quiet corner of Russia, where the snow was supposed to come, but instead, only a mist arrived, soft and silver, wrapping the old town in a sleepy haze. The lamps flicker, the air smells faintly of pine and tea, and even the dogs seem unsure whether to bark or just sigh into the fog. You know, if you were expecting a grand winter storm tonight, you'd probably be disappointed. But hey, at least your shovel gets a night off. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it in your corner of the world? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You'll wander through the outskirts of an old Russian town, somewhere near the fading edge of the 19th century. The air carries a promised winter, almost kept, cool enough to touch your skin, but never quite cold enough to snow. Each breath feels ancient, filled with stories whispered by chimney smoke and written in frost that never formed. The sky has forgotten how to snow tonight. Instead, it dreams in mist. Cobblestones glisten beneath your boots, slick like the backs of sleeping fish. The streets are empty, yet never lonely. Even silence keeps company here. From far away comes the faint rhythm of metal, perhaps a distant train, or perhaps your imagination stretching through fog. Somewhere, an old Samovar exhales a sigh of steam, reminding you that warmth still exists. Wooden houses glow with amber light, their windows breathing against the mist. Inside, people sip dark tea, spoons circling without hurry. The scent of pine wood drifts from every chimney, softening the night. The town doesn't mourn the missing snow. It wears the mist like an old coat, damp, familiar, beloved. Locals once said mist was snow that lost its courage on the way down. You watch the air shimmer on a flickering street lamp, almost ready to fall. Then it stretches lazily, choosing to remain a dream. It is 1897. Russia has just completed its first full census, counting every soul from St. Petersburg to towns that maps barely remember. The news has not reached this place. It may never. Here, people measure life in cups of tea, not in numbers. Still, the moment exists. A quiet pause between eras, wrapped in fog and the hum of distant rails. The townsfolk tell a story. On the night the census began, the mist grew so thick that compass needles spun in confusion. Travelers claimed the air was alive, humming faintly, and for a few minutes, even the earth forgot where north was. Perhaps she sighed at being counted, weary of precision, longing instead to stay undefined. And so, beneath this restless sky, the town dreams on, counted by no one, yet whole in its own quiet way. You continue walking, and each step presses a soft note into the wet cobblestones. The sound is strangely musical, like tapping a muted drum. Your breath joins the mist, turning every exhale into a ghostly ribbon that floats beside you before dissolving. A cat darts across the street, its fur glimmering with dew, its tail high and unimpressed. Somewhere in the distance, a door creaks open, then shuts again, the kind of sound that doesn't need a story to explain it. As you wander deeper, the lamps grow fewer. Their light becomes gentler, more private, as if reluctant to reveal too much. The mist thickens, brushing against your cheeks like silk left in a cold room. You think about how strange it is, a night when even time feels slower, as if every second stops to admire its own reflection before moving on. At the edge of the square stands a weathered statue, half hidden by the mist. It might be a poet, a soldier, or just someone who once mattered. You can't quite tell. Even the pigeons seem uncertain, perched nearby in quiet truce with the night. You imagine the statue sighing softly, thankful that the fog conceals its cracks. A few streets away drifts the scent of bread, or perhaps honey cakes cooling on a windowsill. The baker must have decided that warmth should be shared, even when snow refuses to come. You smile. The air tastes faintly of flour and firewood, a modest kind of comfort. The townsfolk have a saying, if the snow forgets to fall, go outside and listen. Somewhere between silence and mist, they say, you'll hear the world breathing. You pause, close your eyes, and there it is. A low hum, deep and steady, like a great sleeper beneath the earth. Perhaps it's the river, restless under invisible ice. Or maybe it's just your heart, echoing the rhythm of old stones. You chuckle. If snow has stage fright, you think, then this mist deserves an award for improvisation. The fog thickens, soft but kind, wrapping the world in its own quiet warmth. Even your footsteps begin to whisper. You wonder what the census clerks in Moscow would make of a town like this, one that exists more in atmosphere than geography. They might count it once, lose it again, and move on. But you, standing here in this breath of silver air, know it's real in a way numbers never are. The night continues to hum. Somewhere, a faint bell rings, or maybe it's just the wind passing through a hollow space. The mist shifts, slow and deliberate, revealing and hiding the same streets over and over again, like a magician rehearsing a trick no one's watching. You take another deep breath, feeling the chill settle gently into your collar. In the distance, you hear laughter, brief, human, and warm, from a house where light still flickers. You imagine someone telling a story beside a stove, their words curling into the same mist you now walk through. The world feels rounder, softer, kinder. You smile again, your eyelids heavier now, as if the air itself is coaxing you toward rest. Tonight, the snow may have forgotten to fall, but the mist remembers everything. It remembers the census, the laughter, the compass that lost its way, and the quiet sound of your shoes on wet stone. And somehow, that feels enough for one peaceful night in the quiet outskirts of Russia. The morning comes, but only in theory. The light is pale and uncertain, filtering through the mist as if asking for permission. You walk down the narrow path that leads toward the river, the great Volga itself, though right now you can barely see 5 steps ahead. The air feels heavier here, filled with that soft mineral scent of water and sleep. Somewhere beneath the fog, the river moves, slow and steady, carrying whispers of other towns that woke earlier than this one. You reach the edge of the village, where every roof gleams with silver moisture. Wooden houses lean slightly, bowing toward each other like old friends sharing a quiet joke. Smoke curls from their chimneys, but doesn't climb high. It folds back into the mist, as though too weary to rise. The whole town seems to breathe in rhythm, a deep inhale of cold air, a soft exhale of warmth. You wonder if it has always been like this, half awake, half dreaming. A single cart rolls along the main road, its wheels carving brief, vanishing tracks. The driver hums a slow tune about waiting for spring, perhaps for your benefit, a reminder that stillness, too, has motion. His horse snorts once, unconvinced. The town rests along the Volga, which feels less like a river and more like a quiet listener. Birch trees line its banks, their pale trunks glowing faintly in the fog like candle wicks that forgot their flames. When you touch one, the bark feels cool and damp, marble that somehow breathes. By late 1899, this region was beginning to change. Far away, rails stretched eastward, the new Moscow-Kazan line, a silver thread meant to sew distant lives together. People said the first train whistle reached even this sleepy place, echoing faintly across the water. None here had seen the train, yet they spoke of it as if it were a myth, a metal dragon that breathed smoke instead of fire, devouring miles like crumbs. Children drew trains in frost on window panes, each image vanishing before anyone could admire it. Some adults grumbled that progress was noisy, but even they smiled at the dream of reaching Moscow in less than a week. The mist ignored such ambitions. It preferred everything to stay suspended in timeless pause. In the quiet marketplace, stalls sleep under canvas. The air still carries traces of dried apples, a glint of forgotten coin, and a cat guarding the fish stand with solemn pride. You nod to him. He blinks back, unimpressed. Across the square stands the town's lone clock tower. Its hands appear only when the mist grows mercifully thin, which isn't often. The townspeople tell time by sound instead. The bell that rings at noon, the rooster who sometimes guesses wrong, the soft rhythm of footsteps on damp stone. Time here moves like a polite guest, never rushing, never late. If you listen carefully, you'll hear a faint hum beneath the fog. Some say it's the river speaking. Others insist it's the new railway's iron rails, humming through the soil like distant music. You can't decide which feels truer, but both seem comforting. The people you meet greet you quietly, as though words might unsettle the mist. Their faces are open, framed by scarves and the smell of warm bread. No one hurries. This place isn't built for haste, but for staying. The cobblestones remember every footstep, and the doors creak not from age, but affection. A woman sweeping her porch pauses to smile. Her broom moves more for rhythm than for cleaning. She says the fog always comes before real snow, a sign that winter is thinking of them. You nod, though you suspect winter has long forgotten. She laughs, saying that forgetting is simply another kind of visit. The Volga hides itself nearby, glimpsed only when the wind parts the mist for a heartbeat. The water gleams like glass, then vanishes again, shy and secretive. You imagine ghostly boats drifting past, guided not by sight, but by memory. And then there's the old story of Verkny Lug, a village that appears only on winter maps. Marked in red ink, it vanishes come spring, as if the thaw erases not just snow, but the place itself. Some villagers swear that once every few years, when the mist grows especially thick, travelers wander into Verkny Lug by mistake, a place where the snow always falls and the lamps never burn out. They return confused, sometimes days later, claiming they heard laughter in a language they couldn't quite place. No one ever believes them, of course. But still, people here tend to walk carefully when the fog grows dense, just in case they step into a village that doesn't like visitors. You pause at the bridge where the road crosses a narrow tributary of the Volga. The water below is invisible, but you hear its calm murmur, a sound that feels older than language. Your reflection barely forms before it's swallowed by the mist. It's like trying to see yourself in someone else's dream. You laugh softly at the thought. At least the dream seems friendly. On a nearby bench, someone has left a newspaper, the ink slightly blurred by dew. You can make out the headline about the railway's expansion. Beneath it, a few smudged letters hint at progress, industry, future. You fold the page gently, feeling like you're holding history before it dries. Then you set it down again. This town doesn't seem eager to join the rush forward. As evening drifts closer, the mist thickens once more, weaving silver threads between rooftops and trees. Lamps glow faintly through the haze, soft circles of gold that overlap like ripples in a pond. The entire town looks as though it is floating, a place halfway between the river and the sky. You find a spot near the water and sit quietly, listening. The fog wraps around you, cool and tender, and the sounds of the town blend into a single peaceful melody. A door closing, a kettle whistling, a voice calling someone home. You realize that this might be what peace sounds like. Not silence, but harmony at a slower tempo. You close your eyes and let the rhythm of the mist settle in. Somewhere out there, the rails keep humming, the trains keep moving, the maps keep changing. But here, along the edge of the Volga, time chooses to still for a little longer. And honestly, you can't blame it. You wake to the sound of something soft but certain, a note that rises from nowhere and spreads across the mist like ripples on a quiet pond. It takes you a moment to realize it's a bell, the bell from the old church that stands at the far edge of town. The sound drifts through the fog with the unhurried grace of a feather falling in slow motion. You pause, letting it wash over you, its tone low and silvery, neither sad nor joyful, just ancient. The church itself is older than anyone alive. Built in 1714, they say, long before the railway or even the cobbled streets. It was made in the Kizzy style, all wood, no nails, only faith holding it together. The spires twist upward like fingers in prayer, their tips fading into mist. When the air is clear, people say it looks as though the building breathes. But today, you can barely make out its outline, just a darker shadow against the pale fog. You walk toward the sound, careful not to slip on the damp stones. Each chime rolls through the air, softer now, as if the fog itself absorbs the echoes. The closer you get, the more you can feel the vibration in your chest. It's as if the sound doesn't just move through the air. It moves through time, touching every winter this town has ever known. When you finally reach the small clearing where the church stands, you see the wooden shingles glistening with beads of moisture. The door is open just a little, enough to let out the faint smell of wax and incense. Inside, a single candle flickers, its flame tilting slightly each time the bell rings. You step inside quietly, feeling the old boards creak beneath your weight like a polite greeting. No one else is there. The pews are empty, and the air feels thick, like a held breath. The walls are lined with faded icons, their colors muted by age and humidity. Yet there's a warmth in the stillness, a gentle companionship in the silence. You sit down, the wood cool against your palms, and listen as the final note of the bell fades into nothing. You wonder who rings it. The rope hangs from the ceiling, heavy and worn, a frayed reminder of centuries of mornings like this one. You pull it gently, testing its weight, but the bell does not answer. It has already said what it needed to say. You smile to yourself, half expecting someone to appear from a side door, perhaps an old caretaker, perhaps a trick of the fog. But no one comes. Stepping back outside, you notice how the mist thickens around the steeple, like smoke rising from invisible fires. The sound lingers in your memory, replaying faintly, even though the air is now silent. You remember what a shopkeeper told you yesterday. Sometimes the bell rings when no one is there at all. They say it happens only on nights of heavy fog, when the town itself seems to dream. A story goes that the first bell ringer, a monk named Pavel, refused to leave his post during a storm in the 1700s. Lightning struck nearby, splitting one of the wooden beams, yet he kept ringing, calling the villagers to safety. When morning came, they found the church intact but empty, and no one ever saw Pavel again. Since then, on nights when the mist grows too thick, people claim they hear him still, one perfect note at a time. Historians still debate whether the sound was real or imagined. Some claim it's only the timbers expanding in the damp, a trick of old wood and weather. Others insist it's just wind curling through the steeple's hollow ribs. Yet those who've heard it disagree. They say the tone carries intent, a softness too human to belong entirely to air and echo. You walk around the churchyard, where small wooden crosses lean at humble angles. The names on them have mostly faded, the letters softened by rain and moss. Each one seems to hum quietly with the same note you heard earlier, as if the bell had left an echo inside the wood. Even the ravens on the fence seem subdued, watching you with polite disinterest. Beyond the churchyard, the land slopes gently toward the river. You can just make out the shimmer of water through the fog. The sound of the bell seems to blend with the flow, one voice slipping into another. For a moment, it feels like the whole landscape is singing a single, endless hymn. You pause on the path and close your eyes. The mist touches your face like cool linen. The world feels vast but close, as though everything has leaned in to listen. The silence after the bell isn't empty. It's full, dense with memory. You can almost hear centuries breathing behind it. A thought crosses your mind. Maybe the bell doesn't to ring to mark time, but to remind people that time is still here, patient and watchful. Maybe it sounds on its own, because the world forgets to notice itself now and then. You laugh softly. It's a comforting kind of superstition. The air shifts softly, carrying the scent of wet bark, candle smoke, and bread baking somewhere unseen. You realize that life continues here, in small, unhurried gestures. A door closing, a window creaking open, a kettle sighing into the fog. Everything moves at the speed of mist. Patient, deliberate, satisfied with simply being. You glance once more at the old church. Its outline has nearly dissolved into the fog, like a memory deciding to rest. The bell stays silent now, yet the stillness it leaves behind hums faintly, as if the sound lingers somewhere beyond hearing. You imagine it floating over the Volga, brushing the river's slow breath, carried far beyond this town's edge. Perhaps someone miles away will pause mid-step, unsure why their heart suddenly beats in time with something ancient and gentle. You turn away, lighter than before. Maybe it's the thinning mist, maybe the calm that silence brings, or maybe just the comfort of knowing that somewhere, in this half-forgotten town, a bell still remembers its song. It waits quietly, patient as the night, ready to ring again someday, not for ceremony, but simply to remind the fog that sound, too, can rest. The library stands at the far end of the square, half forgotten behind a veil of fog and ivy. Its windows glow faintly, the light trembling like a small heartbeat in the mist. Inside, the air is filled with the quiet scent of paper and time. Dust hangs in thin columns of candlelight, shifting only when the old librarian moves. He moves rarely. His name is Yuri Antonovich, though few ever call him that. Most simply say, the librarian, as if there were no other kind. He has lived among these shelves longer than anyone remembers, longer, perhaps, than some of the books themselves. Each evening he lights a single beeswax candle on his desk, its flame steady and calm, illuminating the pale folds of his hands. It's the only light he needs. The library is older than the railway, older even than the church bell that still sometimes rings through the fog. It was built by a nobleman's widow who wanted the town to remember its words. The building leans slightly to one side now, but it has the dignity of old trees, graceful even in decay. Yuri spends his evenings dusting the shelves with deliberate care. He wears gloves patched at the fingertips, not for warmth, but out of respect. Each spine he touches seems to recognize him, the leather softening beneath his hand. Tonight, he lingers in the history section, volumes bound in faded red, gold lettering dimmed by years of candle smoke. He hums under his breath, an old hymn no one else remembers. On the third shelf, between the chronicles of the Volga region and memoirs of a court physician, lies a book he hasn't touched in decades, Reforms and Shadows, the era of Alexander II. The cover is cracked like dry bark. When he pulls it free, a thin puff of dust rises, spinning in the candlelight like ghostly snow. He opens the book carefully. Inside, the pages smell of iron ink and river damp. Near the center, something slips out, a folded piece of paper, yellowed and brittle, its edges curled with age. There's no date, no signature. Only a few lines, written in a fine hand with ink that has almost vanished. On the night of the frostless fog, we wait beneath the oak by the river. What was freed must not be forgotten. He reads it twice, tracing the words with one trembling finger. The night of the frostless fog, he murmurs. The phrase feels familiar, like a half-remembered melody. Yuri leans back, the candle's light trembling against his spectacles. He thinks of March 1861, the emancipation of the serfs, Tsar Alexander II's great reform. A decree that freed millions, yet left them rootless, still bound by debt and land they could not afford. His father used to speak of it, not with bitterness, but with quiet confusion. Freedom had come like an unexpected thaw, the ice melting, but the fields still frozen. He sets the letter down beside the candle. The wax has begun to drip slowly, forming a small pool of gold that hardens with time. The flame sways each time he exhales, as if listening. He wonders who wrote the letter. A scholar? A peasant? Someone who feared that freedom could vanish as quietly as mist? Outside, the fog presses against the windows like a gentle animal. The world beyond the glass is shapeless, soundless. Inside, every tick of the old wall clock feels magnified, like a heartbeat in a cathedral. Yuri stands, taking the letter to the long table at the center of the room. There he keeps a small map of 19th century Russia, its edges frayed. He spreads the letter beside it, trying to match the clue, beneath the oak by the river. There are many oaks, many rivers, and more forgotten nights than anyone could count. Still, something in the phrasing draws him back to this very town. The Volga, the fog, the absence of snow. He remembers a story his grandmother once told him, about a night long ago when the mist came without winter as frost, thick enough to hide even the moon. The villagers awoke to find strange footprints near the riverbank, leading to the old oak grove and stopping abruptly, as though whoever walked there had vanished mid-step. No one ever found out what happened. Some said it was smugglers. Others whispered it was a meeting of freed serfs planning their new lives. The truth had sunk into the soil along with the roots. He picks up the letter again. The handwriting trembles faintly, not from age, but from haste. The words, must not be forgotten, echo in his mind. He thinks of his library, of these thousands of silent witnesses to human memory. Books are full of things the world tried to forget. Maybe this letter is one of them, a message meant to outlive its sender. The candle burns lower, its light turning amber. Shadows stretch across the floor like spilled ink. Yuri returns the book to its place, but keeps the letter folded in his pocket. He plans to examine it again tomorrow, perhaps with better light, perhaps with tea and patience. For now, he simply sits, letting the warmth of the flame steady his breathing. Outside, a single bell tolls, one note, pure and far away, threading itself through the soft sigh of the river. The sound seems to settle on the old library's roof, a faint vibration between wood and silence. The librarian closes his eyes, and in the dimness behind them, he sees it all. The oak by the river, the mist that never froze, and a few still figures waiting at the edge of memory. When he opens his eyes again, the candle has burned low. Its flame quivers, small but steady, the wick curling inward like a question only time could answer. He smiles, not out of joy, but out of recognition. "We remember," he whispers, the words barely audible, a vow spoken to dust and echoes. Then, with a slow breath, he blows out the flame. The darkness folds around him gently, neither heavy nor cold. For an instant, the library seems to pause, as though holding its own breath. The air smells faintly of wax and ash. Somewhere beyond the window, the mist thickens, patient, protective, keeping the night's small secret safe for one more quiet hour. The morning light drifts through the kitchen window like a faint golden mist, carrying with it the scent of birch smoke and tea leaves. The samovar stands proudly in the center of the wooden table, polished brass, round and gleaming, its spout catching the light like a wink from an old friend. Tiny bubbles begin to rise within, soft and rhythmic, as though the water hums in contentment before the boil. The kitchen belongs to the Kuznetsov family, whose house sits near the riverbank. It's a small, warm space where everything has a purpose. Clay jars of honey, bundles of dried herbs hanging from the beams, and a checkered tablecloth that has survived 3 generations of winters. Outside, the fog still clings to the eaves, but inside, it feels as though the world is already thawed. Nadia Kuznetsova, a woman in her 60s with silver hair tied in a neat braid, tends to the samovar like a ritual. She learned it from her grandmother, who learned it from hers. To heat the samovar is to summon comfort, to invite conversation. The coal compartment glows, the metal shell sighs, and soon the lid trembles with the faint sound of simmering water. Steam begins to drift upward, curling in graceful ribbons that catch the morning light. Her grandson, Mikhail, sits by the window sketching the fog outside. His pencil moves slowly, tracing the way the mist blends with the horizon. He says the world looks unfinished this morning. Half dream, half memory. Nadia smiles. Then let the tea finish it, she says, pouring a handful of loose black leaves into the small porcelain teapot resting atop the samovar's crown. The fragrance deepens instantly, a rich, earthy warmth that fills every corner of the kitchen. It smells of old caravans that once crossed the steppes from China, of long journeys and shared fires. Russian tea culture, Nadia often says, is not about the drink itself, but about the space it creates between people. In the 18th century, samovars became the heart of every home, the pulse of Russian hospitality. Around them, secrets were told, songs were hummed, and winters were survived. Mikhail lifted his gaze from the drawing that had occupied him all morning, his pencil hovering just above the paper. The fog outside pressed softly against the window, turning the world beyond into a moving blur of white and gray. In the kitchen, the air smelled of tea and polished brass, warm and faintly metallic. On the counter, an old samovar rested, its curved surface dulled by age, but still catching a glimmer of light from the stove's low flame. Nadia stood by the table, stirring sugar into her tea. The spoon clinked gently against the glass, each sound delicate as the pulse of memory. Her eyes drifted to the corner where the samovar sat. A faint hum seemed to rise from within it, so soft that one could almost mistake it for the sound of the house itself breathing. She thought of her grandfather's story, a night long before her time, when the samovar had whistled without fire, exhaling a low, mournful note like wind through metal. It had been winter then, deep and colorless, a fog without frost. They said even the stars had hidden. The tale had always sounded impossible, yet strangely comforting. Some things, she believed, were meant to be half-true, kept alive not by proof, but by warmth. She poured the amber tea into 2 cups and stirred in a spoonful of raspberry jam. The red swirl spread slowly, tinting the tea the color of a fading sunset. Across the table, Mikhail worked quietly, the tip of his pencil whispering against the page. The rhythm of the house became a kind of music, the slow bubbling of water, the faint hiss of steam, the sigh of the cat curled near the stove. He drew the samovar not as an object, but as a spirit. The rising steam became faces, kind, curious, half-formed, the shapes of things that wished to be remembered. His pencil caught the motion of it, the living breath of metal. Nadia watched in silence, feeling an odd weight in the air, a warmth that seemed to pulse gently between them. The steam lifted in 3 short bursts, then one long, repeating itself like a pattern, almost like breathing. She stood very still, her spoon suspended above the cup. The air thickened. The room felt smaller, denser, and the hum from the samovar deepened, not loud, but certain. For a moment, she thought she heard the same tone her grandfather had described, that impossible note made of memory and air. It passed quickly, melting into silence, leaving behind only the steady rhythm of the kettle. She reminded herself that fog could play tricks, that warmth, fatigue, and the mind's desire for wonder could invent what wasn't there. Yet part of her knew better. She cleaned the cups slowly after they finished their tea. The motions were familiar, comforting, porcelain against porcelain, the faint scrape of cloth against metal. Mikhail closed his sketchbook, his face calm, the faintest smile touching his lips, as though he had caught something invisible and true on paper. Outside, the fog was thinning, revealing the outline of the river and the narrow bridge crossing it. The light had changed. Pale gold now, tentative but growing. Nadia turned toward the sink, setting the cups aside. The warmth of the tea lingered in her palms, a small echo of something older. Then, behind her, the samovar made a sound, soft, metallic, deliberate. A single note, like a sigh trapped between memory and breath. She froze. The cat stirred, but did not wake. Slowly, she turned her head. The samovar stood quiet, unmoving, its brass surface faintly steaming. Above it, a thin wisp of vapor rose, coiling once before fading into the morning light. The silence that followed was gentle, almost affectionate, as though the house itself had exhaled. Nadia let her hands rest against the table and closed her eyes for a moment. The air was still warm, scented with tea, jam, and a trace of something older, iron, oak smoke, perhaps remembrance. The samovar did not sing again, but its presence remained, steady and alive. Somewhere beyond the fog, the river murmured. The house breathed. And in that quiet, between sound and stillness, something unseen, something kind lingered. By mid-December, the Volga should have been silent, its wide body locked beneath a hard sheet of ice, its current asleep under winter's rule. But in the winter of 1902, the river refused to freeze. It exhaled instead. Each dawn, thick mist rose from its surface like steam from a great lung, rolling slowly through the town until it swallowed every rooftop and birch trunk in sight. People called it the breathing season. The phenomenon puzzled everyone. The air was cold enough to bite, the trees encased in frost, yet the river stayed fluid, dark, alive, whispering beneath its ghostly veil. Some said it was the moon that kept it warm. Others claimed the river had a soul, and that this year it simply did not wish to sleep. Fishermen stopped venturing out. Their nets, left by the docks, froze stiff overnight, though the water beside them rippled gently, as if mocking the cold. The fog thickened toward evening, and sometimes, if one stood still enough, faint ripples of warmth could be felt brushing against the ankles, like invisible hands moving through the mist. Old Petrusha, the boatman, was the first to speak of what he saw. He claimed that one night, when the moon hung low and red, the river shimmered with pale light from beneath, as if hundreds of candles burned underwater. The sight frightened him so deeply, he left his oars by the quay and swore never to row again. "The river's not cold this year," he told the tavern men, his voice trembling. "It's alive, and it's dreaming." Historians later wrote of 1902 as the year without ice. The Moscow-Kazan line reported weather anomalies across the Volga basin, unseasonable warmth, erratic fog, even rain that froze midair before touching ground. Scientists from Yaroslavl visited to collect measurements, their breath turning to frost as they leaned over the still-moving water. They left with notebooks full of numbers, but no answers. The townsfolk, however, didn't need explanations. They whispered that the river remembered something, perhaps an old sorrow, perhaps a promise unfulfilled. "It breathes because it's waiting," said Nadia Kuznetsova, whose kitchen samovar had sung weeks earlier. She stood by her window each morning, watching the mist curl upward like incense from a hidden altar. Sometimes, when the wind shifted, she thought she heard faint music, not from any bell or human voice, but from deep beneath the current. On one of those fog-heavy mornings, young Mikhail walked to the embankment with his sketchbook. The air was thick and moist, smelling faintly of iron and thaw. He crouched by the stone steps and watched the water swirl in lazy circles. It should have been frozen solid, yet he could see his reflection wavering on the surface, clear, alive, shivering. He touched the water with one gloved hand and gasped. It wasn't icy. It was warm, not by much, but enough to send a tremor through his fingers. When he told his grandmother, she only nodded. "The moon is closer this winter," she murmured, half to herself. Perhaps it lends its warmth to what remembers light. That night, The moon rose enormous and pale, veiled by the same fog that blanketed the river. Its reflection glowed on the water like a path of silver silk. A few villagers gathered quietly on the bank, clutching shawls and lanterns. None spoke. They watched as the river shimmered and breathed, small waves forming, though there was no wind. Every so often, the mist parted just enough to reveal streaks of luminescent ripples running against the current, soft, pulsing bands that faded when looked at directly. Petrosha crossed himself, his breath trembling in the chill air. The sound rising from the river felt unearthly, ancient, something that belonged neither to wind nor water. He remembered the old tales whispered in the village. Fishermen pulled under by sudden currents, children lost near the thawing banks. In his heart, he believed it was their voices now stirring beneath the fog, the souls of the drowned calling for the ice that had forgotten them. Father Leonid stood beside Petrosha, motionless as the mist wound around his cassock in soft spirals. His calm gaze traced the slow exhalation of the river, his expression neither fearful nor surprised, only solemn, as though he recognized in the strange warmth a kind of grace. The fog breathed gently, pulsing with a rhythm that felt almost human, a quiet pulse between earth and sky. The two men stayed there in silence, their outlines fading into the shifting light, while the sound from the water deepened, low, melodic, ancient. When dawn arrived, the fog did not lift. The river continued to move, dark and steady, sending threads of steam into the pale air. Later, scientists returned, their instruments clicking in disbelief. The warmth of the river defied their logic. Cold above, heat below, existing together in fragile balance. Dr. Voronin noted it simply. The river seemed to breathe. The strange season lingered for weeks. Birds flew low, uncertain. Frost avoided the riverbanks, and the mist thickened at twilight until even the stars were swallowed. The fishermen said that if you leaned close enough to the water, you could feel its slow exhale, the steady rhythm of a sleeping giant dreaming beneath the surface. Then, one morning in late January, the miracle changed. The fog dissolved all at once, revealing a sky so clear it almost hurt to look at. The villagers rushed toward the river, expecting it finally frozen. But the water still ran dark and free, gliding beneath the first light of day. Only in its center had something shifted. A fragile circle of ice, thin as glass, gleamed where the moonlight had always touched most deeply. That morning, Mikhail opened his sketchbook and began to draw, calm, deliberate lines capturing the river that lived, the perfect ring of ice at its heart, and the shimmer where pale light met moving water. He titled it The River That Refused Winter, and beneath the sketch, he wrote a single line his grandmother had once murmured. The river breathes, for it remembers the warmth of the moon. Years later, when the fogs returned and the bells tolled again without hands to guide them, people still spoke of that strange season, the winter when the river chose memory over silence, warmth over forgetting, and reminded the living that even water can remember kindness. The town sleeps beneath a quilt of mist, and you find yourself walking through its silence. Each step sounds softer than snow, your boots pressing into the damp cobblestones, as if the earth itself exhales beneath your weight. The lamps above you glow faintly, pale halos suspended in fog, their light diffused until the night seems made of breath and memory. You move slowly, listening. Even silence, you realize, has a rhythm here. The streets are empty, though they carry traces of life. A forgotten broom leaning against a wall, a window half open, as if expecting someone's return. In the 1890s, these lamps would have burned on oil, their wicks trimmed by weary lamplighters before dawn. But now, electric bulbs hum faintly, replacing the old amber glow with something colder, whiter, more deliberate. Progress hums quietly above you, though the mist softens its modern edge, turning the world back to a dream. You pause beneath one of those new electric lamps. The metal pole sweats moisture. The glass dome above it flickers, its light trembling like a nervous heartbeat. The change from oil to electricity, they say, began not far from here, a revolution of wires and copper veins stretching from Moscow outward like roots of light. Yet tonight, as you walk alone through the fog, you could almost believe the lamplighters still roam these streets, invisible but faithful, trimming wicks that no longer exist. Your footsteps echo faintly off the stone walls, though the mist catches most of the sound and folds it away. The rhythm of your pace comforts you, heel, toe, breath, like a quiet metronome guiding your thoughts. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once, then stops, perhaps realizing how fragile sound becomes when wrapped in fog. You turn down a narrower street, one lined with wooden houses whose shutters are closed tight. A smell of damp pine and iron lingers in the air. Every window you pass seems asleep, everyone except one. Near the end of the lane, there's a house that glows. Its curtains are drawn, yet a steady, golden light seeps through the cracks, steady as the moon but warmer. You slow your steps, curiosity tugging at you like a child's hand. Everyone in town knows this house. It stands slightly apart, a little taller than its neighbors, its roof patched with moss. No one lives there. At least, that's what they say. The last family moved out 20 years ago, after the father vanished on a journey to Kazan. Since then, the doors have stayed locked, the shutters closed, yet each night, the upstairs window shines. Some claim it's a leftover wire from the electric line, a trick of faulty wiring. Others say the light appears only when the fog is thick enough to hide footsteps. You approach, half laughing at yourself. It's probably nothing, maybe even a reflection from the street lamp. But as you draw closer, you notice that the air around the house feels warmer, almost like standing near a kettle. You hold your breath. The mist here glows faintly gold, pulsing as though the fog itself remembers the light inside. For a moment, you think you see movement, a figure passing behind the curtain. It's subtle, no more than a ripple, but it's enough to send a small chill down your spine. You step back, the cobblestone slicked beneath your heel. Then, as if aware of your gaze, the light flickers once, not fading, not brightening, just acknowledging you. The fog thickens, swallowing the house again. You keep walking, slower now. Every few steps, you glance back, but the light is gone, or maybe just hidden. The streets wind and twist ahead of you, each turn revealing another lamp, glowing weakly through the mist. The new electric bulbs, installed in the late 1890s, were meant to make cities safer, to keep darkness at bay. Yet tonight, they seem gentler, like old souls learning to whisper. A memory rises as you walk, the story an old historian once told you over tea. How when Moscow first replaced its oil lamps, people complained that the new lights were too harsh, too sharp, that they stole the softness of night. Some even swore the electric glow scared away dreams. Change always hums louder than comfort, he had said with a chuckle. You smile now, thinking of it. The historian would have loved this fog. It makes even progress look like a ghost story. You pass the church square, empty and dim. The bells are silent tonight, and the statue in the center wears a shawl of mist. A single crow perches on its shoulder, feathers wet, eyes glinting faintly in the electric light. You nod at it out of habit, a quiet greeting between travelers, awake too late. Your footsteps guide you toward the river road, where the mist grows thicker, dampening every sound. The cobblestones here feel older, smoother beneath your boots. The river itself is hidden, but you can hear its breathing, the slow lap of unfrozen water against the banks. The sound blends with the soft hiss of the electric wires above, creating a hum that feels almost alive. You find comfort in it, a rhythm to match your steps. As you near the last turn before home, the fog parts slightly, revealing the hill beyond. There, faint but unmistakable, you see a single light glowing again. Not from the mysterious house this time, but from a window higher up the slope. It flickers gently, not with electricity, but with something softer, steadier. You can't tell if it's a candle or a reflection, but it feels familiar, almost kind. You pause, listening. The night holds its breath. Somewhere behind you, the faintest echo of your own footsteps continues, just a fraction out of sync, as though the mist itself has learned to walk beside you. You smile, half amused, half serene. Perhaps even fog gets lonely. When you finally reach your door, your coat heavy with dew, you glance once more toward the street. The lamps hum, the mist curls, and somewhere far off, a light still burns in the house where no one lives. You whisper a good night to it, unsure whether you mean it for the house or for yourself. The fog accepts your words and folds them gently into silence. The street remains behind you, breathing softly under its electric halo, a place where footsteps fade but never fully disappear. The morning mist lingers when you step into the old post office. Its wooden door groans like a tired violin, and the scent of paper and dust greets you in slow waves. The air feels older here, thicker somehow, as if each breath carries the weight of forgotten words. Inside, letters lie in neat but endless piles, their envelopes yellowed, their corners curled like sleeping leaves. No one has sorted them in years, maybe decades, and yet the room hums faintly with expectation, as if the letters are still waiting to be read. You walk slowly between the tables, your boots whispering against the floorboards. The shelves bend under the weight of unmailed dreams. A calendar on the far wall still shows a date from 1898, its ink faded to a faint gray. The clock above it has stopped at 5:15, though the air feels like it has been holding its breath since that exact minute. You could almost imagine the clerk stepping out for tea and never coming back. This post office once connected the town to the wider world. Under Catherine the Great, the Russian postal system had expanded into one of Europe's grandest networks, thousands of stations across endless steppes. Couriers on horseback once galloped through snow and storm, carrying royal decrees and love letters with equal dignity. Here by the Volga, the mail came by river and rail, wrapped in twine, kissed by seal wax still soft from the fire. Now it is only the mice that carry messages, and they are in no rush at all. You pause beside a small wooden desk. On it rests an ink bottle, its contents long dried to a glassy shell, and a pen knob rusted into stillness. A half-written letter lies beneath it, the words frozen mid-sentence. You trace them gently. To my dearest Anya, the fog has not lifted, and yet I... The rest dissolves into an ink blot, like the memory of a sigh. There's a soft sound from the far corner, not movement, exactly, but a kind of paper shuffle, like a whisper between envelopes. You follow it, your curiosity piqued. The light from the window is dim, diffused by the eternal fog outside. You kneel beside a stack of letters bound in twine. The first few are ordinary, correspondence from tradesmen, soldiers, mothers to sons. But one catches your eye. Its postmark reads not yesterday, nor any day known. The date is faint but clear, January 32nd, 1897. You blink. There is no such date, of course. The numbers sit confidently in their circle of red ink, as if unaware of their impossibility. You pick up another letter from the same pile, this one marked March Zeroth, 1900. The handwriting is elegant, the seal unbroken. You smile despite yourself. Someone must have been very tired, you whisper. But a small, uncertain part of you wonders if the sender knew something you did not. According to the old caretaker, the post office still receives letters, or rather they appear. He once swore that every few weeks a new envelope materializes somewhere among the piles, its paper crisp, its wax unblemished. They're postmarked, he said, from the days that never arrived. You'd laughed at the story then, sipping tea by the Samovar. But standing here now, surrounded by silent witnesses of ink and parchment, the tale feels less amusing. You pick up one such envelope and turn it over in your hand. The address reads simply, "To Moscow." No name, no street, no district. Just a city, vast, eternal, unknowable. You imagine a courier, years ago, sorting letters by lamplight, pausing at this one and hesitating. Perhaps he'd thought, "I'll deliver it tomorrow." But tomorrow never came, at least not for this letter. You break the seal gently, half expecting the paper to crumble. It doesn't. Inside, there's only a single sentence written in fine, slanted ink. When the snow forgets to fall, even words lose their way. You stare at it, unsure whether to smile or shiver. Outside, the mist presses gently against the window panes, as though trying to peer in. For a long moment, you sit at the desk, listening to the silence. The world feels far away. Moscow, Catherine's empire, even the breathing river, all reduced to memory and dust. You think of the countless voices these letters once held. Promises, confessions, ordinary chatter. All stranded between sender and receiver, caught in an eternal pause. Perhaps this is what happens when time hesitates. Correspondence freezes mid-flight. You lean back, glancing toward the shelves. Hundreds of envelopes gaze back at you, patient and uncomplaining. You imagine the clerks who once handled them, their fingers stained with ink, their voices echoing across centuries. This one's for the capital. This one's for the soldier in Ryazan. This one's for the girl who never left her name. You almost chuckle. If bureaucracy ever had a soul, it must have lived here, organized, exhausted, endearingly human. The fog thickens outside. Through the warped gloss, the lamplight glows like a coin at the bottom of a shallow pond. You stand, brushing dust from your coat. The letter with the impossible date still rests on the desk, its edges trembling faintly in the draft. You hesitate, then tuck it gently back under the ink bottle. Some messages, you think, are meant to stay undelivered. As you leave, you glance once more at the rows of forgotten mail. In the faint hum of silence, you could swear you hear a soft rustle, as if somewhere among the piles, another envelope has just appeared. You smile at the thought. Maybe the world still writes to itself, even when no one is left to read. Outside, the mist folds around you once more as the post office door closes behind, sealing centuries of waiting within its tired walls. You step back onto the river road, empty-handed yet strangely lighter, as though you've delivered something unseen, a quiet offering to time itself. The air hums with the weight of words never spoken, their echoes weaving through the fog. Between your footsteps, the silence feels alive, tender and watchful. Somewhere beyond sight, the river breathes beneath, its veil carrying with it the slow murmur of unfinished messages drifting through mist and memory, promising that one day, perhaps, when no one is waiting, the words will finally find their way home. The inn stands at the edge of the old road, its windows dimly glowing through the mist. Inside, warmth pools like honey, though the air carries the faint scent of iron and wood smoke. A single clock hangs above the mantel, an antique from the 17th century, its brass casing dulled with age. The innkeeper says it was the first of its kind in this region, imported from a Dutch craftsman when Russia was only beginning to understand the mechanical art of time. You look up at it. The clock should not work. Its pendulum, the steady heart that keeps time alive, is missing. Yet the hands move slowly, quietly, without hesitation. They circle the dial as if nothing has changed, as if gravity itself has made peace with impossibility. The guests who stay here whisper about it. Some say it runs on air pressure, others on trickery, but the locals insist on something simpler. It breathes with the fog. You order tea, and the innkeeper, a small man with soft eyes, nods knowingly. He sets a steaming cup before you and glances at the clock. "It's been that way since my grandfather's day," he says. "When the pendulum broke, we thought it would stop." But the next morning, it was ticking again, as if it had never cared for such a thing. He shrugs, smiling faintly. Maybe time just doesn't stop for some places. The fire murmurs softly, while the fog outside leans against the windows, patient and alive. You watch the clock's second hand creep onward, slow and deliberate, as if feeling its way through time. Between refilled cups and quiet gestures, the innkeeper shares the tale in pieces, letting the pauses speak as much as words. The clock arrived here in the early 1600s. He says, when Russia had begun importing mechanical timepieces from Europe. For villages that still lived by sunlight and bells, the arrival of a ticking mechanism was nothing short of magic. The nobleman who brought it was said to have been obsessed with precision. He wanted every moment measured, every hour accounted for. But when he died, the clock was passed down, eventually finding its way to this humble inn. Its grand purpose, reduced to marking the tea hours of travelers and merchants' dock, and one winter night, the pendulum simply fell. The chain snapped. The brass weight rolled under the stove. They tried to fix it, but the mechanism refused to open. "Leave it," said the innkeeper's grandfather. "It's old and tired." But the next morning, when he returned to the room, the clock was ticking again. The pendulum was still gone, yet the sound, that quiet, rhythmic heartbeat, filled the air as if nothing had happened. Since then, it has never stopped. Even when storms cut the power, even when frost sealed the doors, even when no one was there to wind it, the hands kept moving. A few travelers, drunk or skeptical, claimed they saw mist curl from the clock's casing, like breath on a mirror. One even said he heard the faint whisper of gears turning in the silence of midnight. Not metal against metal, he insisted, but like lungs softly exhaling. You sip your tea and glance again at the clock, its brass face glinting softly in the firelight. The ticking drifts through the room, steady and unhurried, weaving between crackle and breath. You wonder what stories it has gathered, centuries of travelers, whispered confessions, the hush after farewells. Through every war and winter, it has kept watch in silence, faithful to the passing of time. The innkeeper laughs gently when you ask if he's ever tried to stop it. Once, he admits. I thought perhaps it was just vibration, something mechanical. He placed his hand on the glass to still the hands, but instead of stopping, they slowed, then pulsed beneath his touch, as if alive. I felt a warmth, he says, frowning slightly, like breathing through the glass. I took my hand away. It started ticking faster again. I've never touched it since. The fog outside thickens, curling through the cracks in the window frame. It seems to listen too, resting against the glass like a pale ear. The guests lower their voices. Someone asks for another round of tea. A woman hums softly, an old lullaby whose words you can't quite catch. The clock ticks on, softer now, its rhythm syncing with the room's quiet heartbeat. You think of time, not the measured kind, but the lived kind, the seconds that stretch when you wait, the hours that vanish when you remember. The clock without a pendulum feels like a rebellion against all that. It doesn't measure time. It preserves it, folding each moment into mist. Perhaps that's why it still runs, because it has forgotten how to end. Later, when the guests retire and the inn grows silent, you stay by the fire, watching. The fog outside has turned silver under the moonlight, and the ticking has slowed almost to stillness. Then, for just an instant, you think you see condensation bloom across the glass of the clock. A faint, foggy breath that fades as quickly as it came. You lean closer, heart quiet. The hands continue to move, steady as ever. You glance toward the window, expecting your reflection or perhaps another face, but find only fog, luminous, breathing softly against the glass, as though leaning in to whisper what it knows. Rising from your chair, you nod to the innkeeper, who answers with a quiet smile and a motion of his cloth across the counter. Behind him, the clock ticks once, faint, deliberate, alive. Stepping outside, you feel the air shift around you, warm despite the chill, pulsing gently like a living thing, the same unseen breath that keeps both night and memory moving forward. You walk down the empty road, the faint ticking lingering behind you, folding itself into the hush of your footsteps. It moves in perfect rhythm, steady, patient, alive. For a moment, you pause, unsure whether the sound belongs to the clock you left behind or to time itself, gently exhaling through the mist, remembering how to breathe. The museum is small, tucked between two birch-lined streets that seem to exist only when the fog lifts. Its sign, the Provincial Gallery of Fine Arts, is carved into fading oak, the gold leaf long since flaked away. Inside, the air smells faintly of varnish and pine, of old paint breathing in rhythm with the seasons. Each footstep echoes gently, as though time itself walks beside you, unhurried. UNBO2HERED. In the eastern wing hangs a single painting that never looks the same twice. It is officially titled Evening over the Volga, attributed to an obscure artist named Ilya Durnov. Circa 1903, the twilight of Nicholas II's reign, when art academies in St. Petersburg and Moscow flourished with color and melancholy alike. Yet no catalog, no critic, no visitor can ever quite agree on what it depicts. Some say it's a riverscape at dusk, others see the faint outline of a bridge, or a figure standing where the mist meets the horizon. What they all agree on, however, is this: every morning the painting changes. The museum's curator, a thin man named Pavel Antonovich, swears by it. It began with a shift in hue, he says, guiding you closer. The water turned from gray to green overnight. Then, a week later, the sky brightened, as if dawn had arrived within the frame. He smiles faintly, though his eyes reveal fatigue. We moved it once, to another room, but by morning it had returned to this wall. You lean closer. The canvas seems to breathe. Beneath the layers of oil, the pigments shimmer faintly, like dew under moonlight. A conservator once examined it under magnification and found traces of a mineral not used in traditional paint, something that reacts subtly to humidity, expanding and contracting in rhythm with the weather. It's a scientific curiosity, she'd said, but even she admitted, off record, that humidity could not explain the shifting shapes, or why a reflection of the moon sometimes appeared where none was before. The fire in the museum's old stove crackled faintly, a fragile warmth against the chill that had crept in from the river. Outside, the fog pressed thickly against the high windows, turning the daylight into a dim, timeless haze. Within that pale glow, the painting hung in its frame, Evening over the Volga, shimmering just enough to seem alive. The colors shifted softly, as though stirred by invisible currents. The curator, Pavel, moved quietly around the room, noting details in a small ledger. His pencil scratched across the paper with deliberate care, marking changes almost too subtle to notice. A deepening hue, a softening of line, a trace of condensation at the lower edge of the canvas. He paused to study the river painted within it, where faint ripples seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. The sound of his breath mingled with the hush of the room, the two becoming indistinguishable. Legend held that the painter, Durnov, had once tried to capture not the light of the Volga, but the passage of time itself, how color could trap memory, how fog could carry emotion. In his final years, he lived by the riverbank, working through nights with only a lantern for company. One winter, he disappeared into the mist and was never found. Weeks later, a single crate arrived at the academy, containing the unsigned painting that would later hang here. Breathing through the years, when the museum first opened, visitors noticed strange things. sketches made of the painting would fade overnight. Hues would change with the weather, and sometimes the air would fill with scents that had no source, rain, stone, or rust, as though the river's breath had followed Durnov into his work. Each alteration was faithfully recorded by curators across generations, none able to explain them, all quietly unwilling to disturb the canvas dot. As the afternoon waned, the gallery emptied. The floorboards sighed with each departing step until silence returned, soft and total. You lingered before the painting, watching how the dim light moved across its surface. The scene seemed to shift in tone. The gold in the sky deepened, the river darkened, and a faint violet glow appeared along the far shore. The reflection in the glass wavered. For an instant, you thought you saw movement, a subtle ripple across the painted water. A small figure standing where none had been before. The fog outside thickened until it became indistinguishable from the fog within the frame. The painting no longer seemed confined by glass or wood. It breathed, its colors pulsing with the rhythm of something vast and old. The scent of wet stone drifted faintly through the room. The notebook on the curator's desk fluttered open to a fresh page, though no hand touched its dot when the final light dimmed. The figure within the painting remained, faint, motionless, and impossibly human, standing at the river's edge, beneath a gold sky that seemed to glow from within dot at first. It's only a silhouette, a man standing by the riverbank, his coat fluttering. But the longer you look, the more you realize he wasn't there before. The brush strokes that form him are old, cracked, aged into the canvas itself, as if they had always been waiting to reappear. You step closer, heart beating softly in your throat. The figure's head turns slightly toward you. His face is indistinct, blurred in mist, yet his stance feels unmistakably alive. You blink, and the figure is gone. The river lies still, the painting once again motionless. By morning, Pavel notes the change with careful script, the gray shifting toward amber, a trace of form near the horizon. He closes the notebook, his hand unsteady, while pale sunlight filters through thinning fog. Yet within the frame, the river remains untouched, silver beneath an unchanging sky. As you step away, the room feels lighter, emptied of its secret. Just before the door shuts, a faint shimmer stirs, a glint along the painted bank, the brief suggestion of a lantern's turn. In that fleeting light, understanding settles. The artist had captured not brightness, but the fragile instant when time itself pauses to alter its hue. The night hung softly over the steppe, a low, endless murmur that seems older than the land itself. Then, distant, trembling, a train whistle breaks through the fog. Long and low, it echoes across the valley, bending around the birch groves and frozen fields. The sound carries a strange ache, like a memory calling out from the edge of time. The year is 1903, when the Trans-Siberian Railway still smelled of iron and ambition. The line stretched across 11 time zones, stitching the empire together with smoke and steam. Villages sprouted near its stations, like small fires in the dark. But some nights, the people said, a train passed that was not on any schedule. No passengers, no lights, only the sound, fading as suddenly as it came. They called it the train without a number. You stand near the platform of a small town, somewhere between Kazan and Perm. The station lamp flickers, its light dim against the thick white air. The timetable nailed to the post is faded, its ink blurring from years of frost. You wait, though you're not sure for what, only that the whistle sounds closer tonight. The station master, an old man wrapped in a wool coat, leans on his cane beside you. If you hear it once, he mutters, it means someone's dreaming. If you hear it twice, it's already too late to wake. He laughs, the kind of laugh that makes no sound. It's said to pass only when the fog is thick enough to hide where the world ends. Another whistle drifts through the air, clearer this time, heavy with longing. The rails hum beneath your feet, though no train can be seen. The mist thickens, swallowing the signal posts one by one until the world feels. Reduced to breath and sound. History remembers the railway as a triumph of engineering, begun in 1891 under Tsar Alexander III, completed over years of backbreaking labor. Thousands of men carved through mountains, crossed permafrost, laid steel through endless forest. But history forgets the stories that rode beside it, the night fires that moved with no one tending them, the trains seen in fog with carriages of light instead of windows, the stations where clocks stopped until dawn. The old man tells you one such story. It was the winter of 1903, the same year this town received its telegraph pole. A heavy fog had rolled in from the river, thick as milk, swallowing the valley. The 2:15 eastbound freight was delayed, so the crew waited inside the signal tower. Around midnight, the operator heard a whistle. Then the rails began to tremble. He looked outside, nothing. No lamps, no smoke, only the sound. It roared past like an invisible beast, shaking the windows, rattling the glass. When the fog lifted the next morning, frost had melted from the tracks, as though something hot had passed through. The old man leans closer, his voice low, almost carried by the wind. He speaks of a vanished station, one the river swallowed when it changed its path. Yet on certain nights, he says, the lost train still passes through the fog, searching endlessly for the place it once called home. You listen. The fog moves like slow breath, swirling above the iron rails. The whistle sounds again, far away, yet everywhere at once. It carries the rhythm of the old locomotives, the sigh of steam and turning wheels, the distant clang of couplings. The ground vibrates gently, and for a fleeting second, the air smells of coal smoke. Through the mist, faint lights appear, not bright, but soft, like lanterns behind frosted glass. You squint, and the shape of a train begins to form. Dark carriages, windowless, gliding without noise. Its motion is too smooth, too graceful. Then, in a blink, it's gone, the rails silent, the fog unbroken. The station master lifts his hat in a quiet farewell before disappearing into the fog, his shape dissolving beside the signal tower until only the echo of his steps remains. The world falls still. You linger by the tracks, surrounded by mist that coils low and restless, brushing against your boots like something living. From somewhere distant, a whistle sounds, faint, drawn out, haunting. It rises and fades, leaving a silence that hums faintly with memory. The wind shifts, parting the fog for a single heartbeat. The rails gleam ahead, vanishing into the white, endless and directionless. When your fingers brush the metal, it is warm, not imagined warmth, but true, as though something enormous had just passed unseen. The mist folds in again, reclaiming the emptiness. Back inside, the waiting room is dim, the fire reduced to soft embers that scent the air with ash and iron. A clock ticks above the door, its rhythm patient and unbothered. On the counter lies a ledger, its spine cracked, its pages yellowed with age. You turn them slowly, each filled with neat records of trains long gone, names, times, destinations. Then the pattern breaks. One entry stands alone, its ink paler, its script unsteady. The date reads March 2nd, 1903. The line for the train number is left blank. The departure time is marked at 23:47. The destination is written simply, unknown. After that, the pages fall silent. You close the ledger slowly. Outside, the fog presses against the window, its surface glowing faintly under the lamplight. The whistle sounds once more, far away now, fading into silence. Perhaps it was real. Perhaps only the echo of steel and steam preserved in the mist. Yet, as you listen, Your reflection in the window seems to shift, a faint shimmer like the flicker of a lantern passing through. For an instant, you could swear you see yourself standing on a platform that no longer exists, watching a train that never stops, moving forever through the fog of its own forgetting. The whistle drifts into silence, dissolving like breath into the mist. The rails hum faintly, their rhythm steady and alive, as if the earth itself were remembering motion. Somewhere beyond sight, the fog exhales once more, and the night unfolds, vast, unbroken, and endless in its quiet pulse. The inn stands at the edge of an old provincial town, where cobblestones catch the glow of amber lamps, and the air carries the scent of rain and lilac soap. Inside, time seems to hesitate. The wood-paneled walls hum faintly with silence. Above the staircase hangs a portrait, a family of 5 posed in quiet symmetry. The father's medals gleam beneath varnish, the mother's gaze serene yet watchful. 3 children sit before them, their lace and sailor-cloth rendered with care. The painter's hand moves gently, reverent, as if afraid to awaken what he has captured, that no one remembers who they truly were. The small brass plaque beneath the portrait reads only Morobi family, circa 1910. Beyond that, history falls silent. The family's name vanished after 1917, when the revolution tore through the provinces and the noble houses dissolved like frost. Their estate burned in a night of gunfire and wind. Servants disappeared into the chaos. Their possessions were looted or lost. Only this single portrait survived, rescued by chance or mercy, its canvas untouched while everything else turned to ash dot. Now it hangs on the landing of an old riverside inn. Guests pause before it, caught by an odd calm that seems to hum beneath the painted surface. The light on that wall is never wrong. Morning, dusk, even candle glow. Always soft, always balanced, as if the room itself were adjusting to honor the scene. Yet whispers persist that the painting shifts. Some claim that, on still nights when the wind carries the scent of the river, an extra figure can be seen, a child half hidden behind the mother's chair. The stories began long ago, after a traveling historian spent the night there one winter. He had gone upstairs after supper and returned moments later, pale and shaking. He spoke of a small hand resting on the chair, of a faint outline that slowly faded into the dark. The others, amused, followed him up, only to find a thin layer of dust disturbed on the lower frame, as though touched by unseen fingers. Since then, the portrait has remained unchanged, at least by daylight. Yet each guest who lingers before it swears that the family within seems never quite complete, as though the painting itself still waits for someone to come home. Since then, the story has grown. Some say the child only appears when the clock below strikes midnight. Others claim it follows guests who linger too long by the painting. The innkeeper, an aging woman named Galina, keeps her own quiet record, sketches, dates, small notes of temperature, and moon phase. "It happens when the fog rolls from the river," she says softly, as if someone remembers to come home. The room itself carries echoes of a vanished class, velvet chairs, porcelain teacups cracked by time, a grand piano missing 2 keys. It's easy to imagine the family once sitting here, waiting out a snowstorm, unaware that their world was dissolving outside. When the revolution came, thousands of families like theirs fled or vanished. Letters stopped arriving. Names were struck from registries. Estates repurposed into schools and hospitals. Art historians sometimes stop by to study the portrait. One, a professor from St. Petersburg, once wrote that the painter's technique suggested a late imperial hand, refined yet fading, like a candle flame nearing its end. But when she examined the work closely, she found something unsettling, an underlayer of paint that did not match the composition. Beneath the surface, faint outlines hinted at a different arrangement, a 6th figure, perhaps, or the same family in another pose. On the night she was first asked to take pigment samples, permission was denied. Whatever lingered beneath the paint, Galina said, did not belong to science, but to memory. And so the portrait remained untouched, a relic of both art and absence. One rainy evening, the inn falls into the soft rhythm of dripping eaves and the muted ticking of a mantel clock. The portrait hangs in the lamplight, steady and watchful. Candle flames shift across the painted faces, turning their stillness into something almost alive. The father's once proud expression seems gentler now, the mother's eyes more distant. Even the smallest girl's blue ribbon appears freshly tied, its satin sheen untouched by dust or time. Yet at the corner of the frame, half swallowed by shadow, another shape begins to suggest itself, a figure, so faint it seems to exist only in the space between perception and imagination. It is the outline of a child, smaller than the rest, one hand resting on the back of the mother's chair. A blink, and the form dissolves into the varnish once more, leaving only darkness. Perhaps it is light, perhaps memory, or perhaps, as Galina once murmured, paint's way of remembering what it cannot forget. That night, the inn grows still. Rain softens into mist, and faint footsteps sound across the floorboards above, slow, measured, too light to belong to any adult. When silence returns, the air carries a breath of lilac, the same fragrance that clings to the canvas. The scent drifts down the staircase and lingers in the parlor long after the fire burns low out by morning. Sunlight filters weakly through the curtains. Galina stands behind her counter, a ledger open, her pen moving in careful strokes. She speaks of spring thaws, of fogs thick enough to blur the lamps into trembling stars. She remembers once seeing more shadows on the wall than there were people in the room. Every house, she says, keeps its memories, though not all choose to reveal them before leaving. You glance again at the painting. Under the pale morning light, the family looks whole, serene, eternal in their silence. Yet near the painter's signature, where once there was only varnish, a faint white smear now catches the sun. It curves gently, almost like the print of a child's hand pressed against glass. Perhaps it had always been there, hidden beneath layers of time and patience. Perhaps it appeared overnight. Either way, as the door closes and the quiet of the inn folds around you, the air seems to shimmer with something fragile, not haunting, but tender. A memory, breathing softly, refusing to fade. The music box sits by the window of a forgotten parlor, its brass dulled by dust and time. When the afternoon light slants through the glass, the carvings on its wooden lid catch faint glimmers, tiny flowers, a river, and a single star. No one knows who first placed it there, but it has remained unmoved for more than a century. When wound, it plays a melody that drifts like smoke, soft, wistful, and hauntingly familiar. Locals call it the song that remembers before it was born. For those who have listened carefully, the tune resembles Katusha, the famous wartime song written in 1938, but the box itself was crafted in the late 1800s, long before the composer Matvey Blanter ever put ink to score. A curator once brought it to Moscow for examination. Inside its mechanism were gears cut by hand, each tooth uneven yet precise enough to sing. No maker's mark, no serial number. The mechanism's configuration didn't match any known 19th century design. One expert said, half-jokingly, it's as if the box learned the song by listening to the future. That night, the curator stayed late in the museum, working alone. He wound the key, placed it by the open window, and watched as the melody rose into the street, slow, patient notes that shimmered against the glass. But after the final phrase, there came a sound he couldn't explain, a faint echo, as though another music box, somewhere distant, had answered. In the morning, the key was gone. Only the faint scent of oil and old pine lingered in the air. the music box was returned to its ancestral home. A countryside manor near Yaroslavl abandoned since the 1920s. Its caretaker, Sergei, placed it back in the original window, where the moonlight could fall across the brass lid as it once had. On certain nights, the air within the house would shift, and a faint melody would rise, delicate, trembling as though carried by invisible breath. The tune grew gradually clearer, unfolding into a lullaby that felt both familiar and unplaceable, a sound that seemed to remember more than it revealed. Visitors spoke of being moved without reason. Some felt a sudden ache of nostalgia, others a quiet joy that vanished as quickly as it came. When the final note faded, silence followed with uncanny depth, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Attempts to capture the phenomenon failed. Sergei's phonograph recorded nothing but the soft ticking of internal gears and a single wavering tone, incomplete and disembodied. The machinery seemed unwilling to give up its secret, as if aware of being watched. Later, examination only deepened the mystery. The wooden casing was traced to a Viennese workshop from the 1870s, yet the spring inside belonged to a design not manufactured until 50 years later. Every surface bore the same patina of age, suggesting it had always existed that way, a contradiction suspended in brass and oak. What lingered most, however, was the song itself, unrecordable and unfinished, echoing faintly in the minds of those who had once heard it. When the song, Katusha, was first performed in 1938, it stirred something older than its own notes. Villagers and soldiers alike sensed a familiarity beneath its melody, as if it carried echoes of another age. The composer himself once confessed that the tune had come to him in a dream, entire and unaltered, a gift from somewhere beyond memory. Rumors soon spread of an antique music box hidden in a ruined manor, said to have played the same melody decades before the composer's birth. During the war, that very manor was consumed by fire, its history reduced to ash and silence. The music box was thought destroyed until years later, when a demolition crew uncovered it sealed behind a wall, swaddled in embroidered linen, marked with the date 1872. Time had tarnished the brass, but the mechanism remained unbroken. When they wound the key, the melody rose again, soft, deliberate, almost human. A restorer took it into his care, determined to uncover its design. He examined the gears, counted every pin on the metal drum, and mapped the intervals with precision. The structure defied all known templates. The proportions were flawless, the mathematics centuries ahead of their time. Under magnification, the mechanism revealed no signs of alteration, as though it had always existed in that impossible state. The melody it carried, the same one that would one day become Katusha, seemed less a composition than a remembrance, something the world had been waiting to hear again. That night, unable to sleep, he left the box on his windowsill. The wind outside carried faint harmonies, birds, rustling leaves, the quiet hum of a distant train. As the moon rose, the music began to play on its own. The sound was so gentle, he almost missed it, but beneath the familiar melody, he heard another line, softer, older, something like a heartbeat woven beneath the tune. He leaned closer. In the reflection of the glass, he thought he saw someone's silhouette, a woman, perhaps standing beside him, her hand resting on the lid. When he turned, the room was empty. The song continued until dawn, ending on a note that seemed to sigh. By dawn, the restorer's journal lay open on his desk, a single line scrawled across the page. Maybe songs don't begin, maybe they return. He vanished soon after, leaving behind only silence. Weeks later, the music box was found in its rightful place by the manor window, untouched. Its key was gone, its brass dimmed by time. Yet it seemed to wait poised between stillness and song. Yet the villagers speak of certain nights, when fog drapes the fields and the wind hums a tune that seems older than memory. They say the melody of Katusha drifts faintly through the air, echoing before the song was ever born. Those who linger near the window claim to hear a soft mechanical stirring, a faint click of gears, a whisper of rhythm, and then a fragile line of music, as though the past itself were breathing, remembering how to sing. The bridge stretches across the river like an echo made solid, stone arches rising through the mist, their reflections trembling on the slow current below. At dawn, it is almost invisible, swallowed by fog that clings to the parapets and the worn balustrades. The townspeople call it Star Most, the old bridge, though no one remembers its true name. Some say it was built under Peter the Great himself, when stonemasons from St. Petersburg journeyed east to raise monuments that would outlast the floods. Others say it simply appeared one winter morning, already ancient, already watching. Moss covers the cracks between the stones, and the water beneath glows faintly silver in the half-light. Every surface seems to breathe, the river, the fog, even the bridge itself. When you walk across, each step sounds softer than the last, as though the air is trying to muffle your presence. Fishermen who work along the banks swear that in the earliest hours, when the mist is thick enough to erase the far shore, they sometimes glimpse shapes moving on the bridge, silhouettes walking slowly, hands folded behind their backs, or women carrying lanterns that never quite illuminate. But when the fog clears, the bridge stands empty, and there are no footprints on the damp stone. A historian once tried to date the structure. The foundation blocks matched 18th century Russian design, thick granite quarried from Karelia, but the mortar contained fragments of something older, almost Roman in composition. "It's as if 2 times touched here," he wrote in his notes, and refused to separate. The bridge, he concluded, might be a restoration built upon ruins that predated Peter's rain god at dusk. The scene transforms. The lamps on either bank cast thin golden threads across the water, while the arches beneath hum faintly, carrying the vibration of unseen footsteps. Couples stroll here in summer, whispering promises that sound like secrets. In winter, though, no one lingers long. The fog grows denser, and the sound of the river becomes strange, not flowing, but murmuring. Like a voice too deep to understand. An old ferryman named Pavel claims he once followed one of those fog walkers. He was returning home late one November night, his lantern swinging in rhythm with his steps. Ahead, he saw a man walking steadily across the bridge, tall, wearing a long coat that swayed without wind. Pavel called out, thinking it might be one of the railway guards, but the man did not turn. His boots made no sound. When Pavel hurried to catch up, the figure reached the center of the bridge, paused, and simply faded, dissolving into mist as though made of it. The next morning, Pavel noticed something strange. The path across the bridge was dry, each stone bare and dark where the figure had passed, while frost clung thickly to every rail and branch around it. The air carried a silence that felt deliberate, as if the river itself were holding its breath. From that day on, Pavel avoided the bridge after sundown. He would watch it from afar instead, where the mist gathered and dispersed like memory, a threshold he had once crossed but would never approach again. There is a local legend, older than the railway, older than the archives. It tells of a craftsman who worked on the bridge's construction centuries ago. He fell into the river during the final arch's setting, and his body was never found. Some say his spirit continues to cross the bridge each night, checking the weight of time on his creation. Others whisper that those who vanish into the fog are not lost, but summoned, chosen to walk beside him until dawn. On certain nights, the fog grows luminous, glowing faintly from within. Travelers on passing trains sometimes see it from afar, a ghostly ribbon stretched across the water. They describe figures moving along it, their shapes blurred but graceful, walking in pairs or alone, their outlines melting into the light. "It looks like a procession," one engineer once said, "as if the bridge remembers every person who ever crossed it." Archaeologists found small coins pressed into the mortar during a recent restoration attempt, kopecks from different centuries. Even one dated 1701. No one could explain how they were embedded so deep in the oldest layers. The project was halted soon after, when several workers refused to return, saying they heard footsteps pacing the bridge long after midnight. Some winter mornings, the bridge is completely hidden. Only the faint sound of dripping water hints at its existence. Yet locals still hear the echo of footsteps, slow, deliberate, unhurried. When the mist finally lifts, frost outlines faint shoeprints leading halfway across and stopping abruptly at the center. A photographer once captured an image there at sunrise. The bridge bathed in pale gold, empty except for two elongated shadows that stretched across the stones. He swore he was alone when he took it. Now, standing here yourself, you feel the air thicken. The river hums softly below, the mist curling around your feet like breath. You take a cautious step forward, the stones cool beneath your soles. For a moment, you think you see movement ahead, a shape, or perhaps only the shifting light. Then, faintly, comes the sound. Footsteps not your own, matching your rhythm, falling half a beat behind. You stop. The echo stops too. The mist stirs, folding and unfolding like a living breath. From somewhere beyond the river, a single bell tolls, low, uncertain, before its echo is swallowed by the fog. You turn to leave, yet the silence feels altered, as though it's listening. When you glance back, the stones behind you bear no trace of passage, no imprint of your steps. Only a thin sheen of moisture glimmers faintly, shaped as if another had walked beside you and vanished mid-stride. The air tastes of iron and river salt. Then, slowly, the bridge begins to dissolve again into the pale veil, its arches sinking into the mist until nothing remains but the faint rhythm of water below. Somewhere within that gray expanse, something breathes, waiting, remembering, crossing still between shadow and the quiet persistence of time. It was in the back corner of the old library, beneath shelves bowed under the weight of centuries, that the book first appeared. It rested between two volumes of regional chronicles, unlisted, its spine unmarked. The candlelight trembled as it was drawn from the dust, releasing a faint scent of dried moss and old paper. On the cover, pressed into cracked leather, shimmered a single line in fading silver: "Endless Winter." No author, no date, no publisher, only the title, as if the book had named itself. The librarian, a man shaped by long, quiet years, lingered near as the book was lifted from the shelf. His gaze held an unease that felt older than curiosity, as though he recognized something best left untouched. When the volume opened, dust spiraled upward, trembling in the candlelight like a spirit remembering breath. The pages were stiff, yet alive beneath the fingers, filled with Cyrillic script too precise for one hand, yet too intimate for print. They told of endless winters that silenced sound, rivers locked in glass, and skies that forgot the color of dawn. Between records of frost and fragments of memory, a hidden voice seemed to breathe through each line, patient, remembering, almost human. The first sentence read like confession, not chronicle. When the sun forgets to rise, memory becomes the only warmth dot as the page is turned. The voice shifted between fact and something older. One entry referenced the meteorological surveys of Sar, Peter's reign, a time when priests were ordered to document weather for the sake of navigation and harvest. But among those empirical records were strange marginalia, sketches of snowflakes shaped like human eyes, and notations written in ink that shimmered faintly blue. The mixture of precision and madness gave the sense that the book itself was measuring not temperature, but time, as if each storm marked the pulse of the world. The further it went, the colder it felt. The candle had to be brought closer, yet the light seemed to recoil, its glow dimming over the text. The ink reflected a color not found in flame. Some pages described a white hour, a moment when everything froze, but thought continued, when dreams replaced breath. When the book closed, the air around it held a subtle chill. Frost gathered faintly on the brass candle holder, though the room was warm. The next night, the book was still there, open to a page that hadn't been turned. The script was new. The strokes slanted, rushed, the ink darker than before. The words described someone reading, a presence aware of being observed. When the flame flickered, the writing vanished, leaving only blank parchment, smooth and cold to the touch. Attempts to trace its origin failed. The catalogue contained no mention of endless winter. The shelf where it had rested appeared on no inventory. The librarian simply said it must have been donated long ago, perhaps misplaced from another collection. Yet the label on its binding bore no accession number, and the leather showed no sign of repair. It had always been there, waiting dot in Russian folklore. Winter was not merely a season, but a returning spirit, gathering fragments of what it had once been. Monastic records spoke of living manuscripts, texts that reshaped themselves to mirror the reader's soul. The book seemed to belong to that lineage. On the fifth night, new words appeared on the final page, written unmistakably in the reader's own hand. The reader becomes the record. No recollection of writing it existed. When the book was shown to the librarian, recognition darkened his face. He traced a mark of ash in the margin, a gesture that felt older than reason, his breath clouding faintly in the air. He left only a single warning, not to turn the 13th page. The warning went unheeded. The 13th page bore a date that could not exist, February 31st, 1902. The entry described a village buried beneath unending frost, where every clock had stopped mid-strike and every echo lingered longer than its cause. The final line carried a weight that pressed against the ribs. The one who reads these words will soon feel the first snow within their lungs. The book was closed at once. The flame dimmed to a blue edge and spat a bead of wax onto the desk. The room's air thinned. When the reader exhaled, the breath fogged before the lips. Outside, the night was mild, yet frost formed on the window from the inside out, a delicate network of veins spreading across the glass like a living script. The next morning, the shelf was bare. The librarian denied any knowledge of such a volume, his tone careful but not convincing. He moved as though walking through a memory he could not acknowledge. That night, the book waited again, on the desk at home, its leather faintly cold, the title newly embossed as though freshly pressed. Inside, the handwriting had changed once more. The letters were now sharper, carved almost into the paper, the ink paler, as if written in diluted moonlight. The final paragraph read, "Winter does not end. It moves from page to page, reader to reader." The book was closed once more, but its silence felt alive. Sleep came fitfully that night. Dreams unfurled in the texture of parchment, white upon white, sentences forming in slow drifts across a field of snow. The words seemed to move like wind, rearranging themselves before they could be read. Some letters gleamed faintly blue. When the dream ended, it left behind a strange residue of cold, a chill that began in the chest and spread outward. Soft but undeniable. Each morning, frost blooms across the window pane, regardless of season, delicate, deliberate, almost like handwriting. The shapes shift with each dawn, forming spirals or faint Cyrillic curves. Yet they vanish too swiftly to be read, leaving only the trace of meaning behind. Somewhere, perhaps in another forgotten library, endless winter waits again for the next reader, its pages breathing faintly, its ink remembering. The story continues, moving through hands and seasons alike, writing itself onward, one name at a time, until even the frost learns to speak. The kettle released a low, steady whistle, a sound that rose softly through the stillness of late afternoon. Steam drifted upward, twisting in languid spirals that caught the pale winter light before dissolving into air. The porcelain cup filled with amber tea, and the scent of black leaves mingled with faint wood smoke from the hearth. Beyond the glass, frost traced its delicate rivers across the window pane, glinting like the veins of distant ice that the warmth between two hands felt almost alive, pulsing faintly through the ceramic. Each exhale fogged the air before the frost-veiled window, where breath and steam met and faded together. The patterns left behind were fleeting, small ghostly shapes, half-formed snowflakes that appeared, trembled, and vanished. The room itself carried an old rhythm, the ticking of a brass clock, the quiet murmur of the samovar on the side table, its hum steady and slow. The brass gleamed like a small sun, reflecting candlelight that danced upon its rounded surface. It felt like a scene preserved from another century, a chamber where twilight held its breath and warmth gathered in gentle pools in the 19th century. Families across Russia had gathered just so at tables near windows rimed with frost. They poured tea at dusk, speaking softly of harvests, of politics, of the strange patience of winter. Some whispered of spirits or of time folding quietly in the snow. Tea was not merely drink, but ritual, the meeting point of heat and cold, memory and silence. That an old belief once said that the samovar remembered every winter it had seen. Perhaps that was true. Steam rose not only from boiling water, but from generations of hands, of voices, of warmth seeking itself again and again through the years. The tea was caravan tea, dark, faintly smoky, a flavor born of distance. The first caravans had carried it from China through Siberia, crossing forests, frozen rivers, and months of frostbitten air. Its taste was said to hold the journey itself, the scent of pine fires, the whisper of wind through canvas, the long patience of snow. Each sip was like tracing the memory of a road no longer traveled. Through the window, the landscape lay in muted stillness. The branches bent beneath invisible weight, and the faint outline of the river seemed to wait for something unnamed. Frost covered the glass in thin white veins that caught the last rays of a hidden sun. Reflected there, the faint image of a face appeared, softened, uncertain, as though borrowed from another time. The library's distant clock struck once. The sound trembled through the floorboards, reminding the air that evening had arrived. The tea rippled gently in the cup. The steam rose once more, forming thin patterns on the window, curving and twisting until they resembled a snowflake drawn by invisible ink. The air around it seemed to hum. Then, beyond the glass, the first flake fell, drifted slowly through the gray, a single white speck spinning toward the earth. Another followed, and then another. Within moments, the world began to dissolve beneath the hush of snow. Roofs disappeared into whiteness. The narrow bridge blurred until it was little more than a ghost of its shape. The air turned thick, soft, and infinite. Inside, the rhythm of the samovar deepened, its soft hiss syncing with the fall outside. The scent of tea thickened, filling the room with the warmth of smoke and spice. Somewhere in the house, porcelain shifted, the faint clink of another cup settling on a wooden table, though only one had been placed. The sound was neither startling nor strange, merely part of the evening's slow unfolding. Old sayings held that tea was meant to be shared with silence itself, that an unseen companion always joined those who drank in peace. To share warmth, even with emptiness, was to honor both the living and the departed. The room seemed to listen. The fire dimmed slightly, its glow deepening to amber. The snow thickened outside, its descent patient and endless. The window no longer looked cold. It shimmered with soft reflections of flame and brass and steam. The air vibrated faintly, as if carrying a memory too delicate for sound. The frost began to melt along the glass where the steam touched it. Droplets gathered and slid downward in thin, uneven paths. They traced shapes that seemed almost deliberate, spirals, circles, the faintest echo of handwriting. For a moment, it looked as though the frost itself were trying to speak. The candlelight swayed. In its flicker, a brief shimmer appeared across the glass, the suggestion of a silhouette leaning near, translucent as breath. The form lingered just long enough to seem real, before dissolving again into reflection. The room held its stillness, unbroken. The snow beyond the pane deepened into a light so complete it erased shadow. The rooftops, the church spire, the quiet outline of the old library, all faded into the same soft silence. The world had become a single unbroken page of light. Steam curled upward again from the cup, tracing its endless ascent. The air was neither warm nor cold now, but balanced perfectly between. Each sip of tea tasted of smoke, of memory, of journeys older than maps. It was impossible to tell whether the warmth came from the drink or from the act of waiting for the snow, for quiet, for the return of something forgotten. The samovar exhaled one final sigh. Its flame flickered low, then steadied. Beyond the window, the snow continued to fall without sound. The night gathered itself around the room, patient and absolute. The tea cooled in the cup, yet the hands holding it stayed warm. The frost had vanished completely, leaving the glass clear. Outside, the white world stretched without horizon. Soft and infinite dot, it was as though the snow had answered some unspoken call, perhaps from the steam, or from memory, or from the simple persistence of warmth refusing to die in that silence. Everything seemed to rest. The air, the tea, the faint echo of breath. The world had exhaled, and winter had come home. It stood at the far end of a narrow cobblestone street, half obscured by fog and memory alike. The air was damp and faintly metallic, the kind that held the scent of old rain and forgotten cities. Above a heavy oak door, a wooden sign hung crooked, its letters eroded almost to nothing. Only the faintest trace could still be read, the Museum of Forgotten Seasons. The door yielded to touch, opening with a sigh. As though it had been waiting inside, the air smelled of dust, pine resin, and something older, a stillness that might have been time itself, sealed in glass and left to breathe in secret. Oil lamps flickered without draught, casting soft halos on the walls. Each shelf and cabinet displayed something fragile and precise. A jar sealed with wax, labeled Rain, April 1872. A shallow tray that held a single unmelting snowflake suspended like a star. A glass orb in which a miniature storm turned slowly. Forever on the edge of clearing, the first museums of weather had existed in Russia since the mid-19th century, though their archives had long vanished, their locations erased by floods, wars, and indifference. Some historians whispered of a twin institution, the one that had slipped between records, preserving what the other had forgotten. The air in this place seemed to affirm that rumor. Every object appeared both authentic and impossible, as though belonging to 2 centuries at once. A display case labeled Autumn, 1784, held maple leaves that refused to crumble. Another, titled Summer, 1816, contained a faint glow sealed inside a crystal prism, a captured sunbeam from the year without summer, its warmth dim but persistent. At the center of the room, beneath a dome of smoked glass, stood a globe carved entirely from ice. It revolved so slowly that the motion could not be seen, only sensed. A placard beneath it bore a single inscription, Preserved Rotation, measured since the last snow beyond that first chamber. The museum unfolded in narrow, shifting corridors that creaked beneath every step. The floors seemed to remember each visitor, answering their movement with long, echoing sighs. From somewhere deep within, faint music drifted, not from any instrument, but from the walls themselves. It rose and fell with a rhythm that resembled breathing, the pulse of unseen seasons turning in their sleep. Portraits appeared along a corridor, painted the color of twilight. Each depicted a personified season. Winter with a crown of frost. Spring holding a vase cracked down its center. Summer gazing out through rain-streaked glass. Autumn smiling faintly, one eye already dissolving into mist. The paint shimmered subtly, as though the subjects exhaled in rhythm with the air. Historians might have called it illusion or chemical reaction, yet the effect felt alive, almost sentient. The corridors changed character as they deepened. A staircase led downward, though the air grew warmer, not colder. Along the walls, hundreds of thermometers hung in uneven rows. Their mercury rested in uncertain positions, some midway, some below freezing, others beyond measurable scale. A few displayed no numbers at all, only words etched faintly in Cyrillic. 0 dreams, -1 memory, absolute absence. At the base of the stair, a vaulted room opened like a cellar of glass. In the center, an enormous jar stood upon an iron stand, filled with water that rippled without touch. Its label read the first thaw. From within came a whisper, a breathy murmur too faint to decipher, as if the sound of melting ice had learned to speak. When the air stilled, the voice vanished. Scholars had long debated whether such a museum had ever existed, whether travelers' accounts were allegory, fever, or some echo of a real place that had long since disappeared. Some dismissed it as a myth conceived by early meteorologists to mourn the loss of natural rhythm, as industrial smoke began to stain the skies. Yet the creak of the wood, the hum of unseen currents, and the scent of pine resin felt undeniable. At the corridor's end stood a narrow door, marked by a fading inscription, Winter Hall, Entry Forbiddens. The hinges opened without protest, revealing a bare chamber lit by the wan glow of a single window. Beyond it stretched a motionless field veiled in mist, its horizon suspended between breath and silence. At the center stood a marble pedestal bearing a wooden box. Within, a thin frost shimmered, refusing to melt, labeled, collected during a night when snow was promised but never came. The stillness felt weighted with patience, a waiting that had forgotten its purpose. Somewhere, unseen water dripped in steady rhythm, echoing softly like a distant heart. As the visitor retraced their steps, the museum seemed altered, light dimmed, air thickened, the scent of resin and candle soot deepening into a quiet memory of warmth, undone. At the threshold, a gust of cold air pressed inward, stirring the lamps. The walls sighed, and the faint music, that quiet pulse from the beginning, deepened, almost grateful. Stepping outside, the fog had lifted slightly. The sign above the doorway was blank, its painted letters stripped to bare wood. When the gaze turned back once more, the building was gone. In its place stood only a brick wall slick with dew, old enough to suggest it had been there for decades. The street lay empty, save for mist winding through the stones. The sound of wind carried the faintest scent of pine and something colder, the trace of long-forgotten rain. Somewhere beyond, music lingered, no louder than breath, a slow, cyclical hum, like the turning of unseen gears within the world. It seemed, certain then that the museum had never been built from stone or wood, but from remembrance itself, a place that surfaced only when the seasons longed for what they have lost. When winter recalled its snow and summer its warmth, it appeared, briefly alive, before dissolving again into fog. As mist closed over the street, the air trembled faintly, as if time had sealed its door. The silence deepened, and somewhere beneath it, unseen yet enduring, the museum of forgotten seasons turned once more. The hill rose gently beyond the village, a curve of earth where the wind always seemed to pause before descending again. From below, you could see it clearly. a single lamp standing at the summit, its glass yellowed by age, its iron post half buried in frost. It was said to be the last lamp before darkness, the one that had never gone out. I began the climb just after dusk. The snow beneath my boots whispered softly, each step swallowed by the gathering quiet. Behind me, the valley glowed faintly, the warm, electric lights of the new century humming in the distance. In the 1920s, electricity had reached even the most remote corners of rural Russia, brightening barns and cottages that had known only candlelight for generations. Yet this lamp on the hill, older than the grid, older than the wires that now veined the countryside, still burned with its small, unwavering flame that no one could say where its power came from. The villagers told stories, that it was lit the night before the revolution and had never gone out since, that it burned on memory alone, that it guarded something beneath the soil. Children dared each other to touch its base, but those who did claimed to feel a heartbeat pulsing through the metal, slow and steady like the earth breathing got. As I climbed higher, the wind thinned into silence. The stars above were dimmed by cloud, yet the lamp's glow cut through the gray, not bright, not weak, but alive, like the last thought before sleep. Each step forward felt like walking out of time itself. Halfway up, I passed a ruined fence, its wood etched with initials. I brushed away the frost and found one faint carving, 1926. That was the year. I remembered when electric lines first reached the villages of the Vologda region. A miracle, they had called it. Yet for those who lived on the hill, no one had ever dared replace their old lamp. It was left to burn, tended once a year by an old keeper, whose name no one now recalled. The snow grew deeper near the top. My breath clouded the air. When I finally reached the summit, I found the lamp standing alone beside a stone bench, its flame enclosed within thick glass that had never been cleaned, its post leaning slightly as though bowing to the years. The light was soft, golden, and motionless. I reached out and touched the lamp. The metal felt cold, yet not lifeless. Beneath my palm, a faint vibration stirred, a low hum, steady and familiar, echoing the one I had once heard deep within the Museum of Forgotten Seasons. It pulsed with the same rhythm, as if something long forgotten were still breathing quietly beneath the surface of the world. Beyond the hill, the valley unfolded into distance. Farmhouses dotted the slope below, their windows glowing with the modern brightness of electric light. The new lamps flickered and buzzed faintly, restless with current, impatient against the dark. But this one, this solitary lamp of iron and glass, remained perfectly still. It seemed to draw its strength not from wire or generator, but from a silence older than invention, from the memory of fire itself. I sat upon the bench beneath it and watched as snow drifted through the air, flakes turning slowly in the lamplight, each one catching the glow like dust suspended in a dream. The flame within the glass did not flicker, did not consume. It was a light that existed only to remember, neither growing nor fading, but enduring, somewhere within the stillness. A thought surfaced like breath, rising to light. Every flame, however small, remembers the darkness it once opposed. The idea lingered, gentle and unhurried, weaving through the cold air. I thought of the librarian and his books that breathed softly in candlelight, of the frost etching faint faces upon glass, of the museum that dissolved with the coming dawn. Each memory felt bound to the next, threads drawn from the same quiet tapestry. It seemed that every place, every whisper, had been waiting for this moment, the final shimmer before silence. When remembrance itself becomes the last form of light, I leaned closer to the lamp, searching for a source. There was no oil inside, no wire leading from its base, only a faint layer of frost that glittered without melting. My breath fogged the glass, and for a heartbeat, the flame seemed to blink, not out, But inward, as though acknowledging me far below, the electric lights flickered once, then steadied again. I imagined that when the first current was sent through these valleys a century ago, this old lamp had simply watched and refused to yield, as if to remind the new light that it, too, was descended from flame. The wind picked up, rushing through my coat. I pulled it tighter and stood. The lamp hummed softly, a note so low it might have been imagined. Then, faintly, another sound joined it, the sigh of the Samovar from the window long ago, the whisper of the woman in gray, the drip of thawing frost. They blended together until it felt as though the entire landscape was breathing in time with the lamp. I took one last look before leaving. Its glow followed me down the slope, shrinking, then pulsing once as though bidding farewell. When I reached the bottom and turned back, the hill was dark, yet I could still see the afterimage of its light, bright against my closed eyelids. They say no one has ever managed to extinguish the lamp, nor has anyone seen it lit anew. Perhaps it doesn't need tending, because it feeds on something we all leave behind, the faint warmth of thought. The ember of every story whispered before sleep. And as I walked back toward the village, the power lines above hummed faintly, their rhythm matching my heartbeat. Somewhere between dream and waking, I understood. Every light, old or new, was the same play against the dark, to be remembered just a little longer before night takes the world to rest. The night deepened until even silence seemed to have weight. The birches stood motionless, their branches etched like ink against the pallid sky. No wind passed through them, and the familiar rustle that once spoke of distant places had vanished. The valley lay still beneath a gauze of thinning mist, its breath soft as sleep. The fog that had blanketed rooftops and church spires began to dissolve, unraveling in slow ribbons of silver. Through its parting folds emerged faint shapes, the curve of the bridge, the chimney smoke turned to vapor. The solitary lamp on the hill, glowing with patient, unwavering light. The air exhaled as if released from long restraint, a tender sigh after endurance. Each window across the slumbering town seemed to echo that breath. Candles guttered to their end. Kettles cooled on stoves, their warmth fading into memory. Circles of frost held the trace of unseen faces, brief moments of life condensed on glass. Time, too, appeared to slacken, no longer marching but drifting, a quiet suspension between heartbeat and pause. Along the cobblestone street, the world felt emptied of sound. The stones that once answered footsteps with rhythm now gave nothing back. Each step seemed to dissolve before it could echo, swallowed by air too soft to return it. The familiar scent of pine smoke lingered at the edges of the cold, mingling with a sweetness that suggested snow, though the first flakes had not yet fallen. The lamps along the street burned faintly, their light curving like liquid over the frost, fragile and warm. A single bell rang from somewhere unseen, perhaps from the old church. Its note stretched thin as silk before vanishing into stillness. The echo wandered briefly across rooftops, brushing chimneys and fading into mist. The sky above revealed no stars, only a pale expanse without direction, where cloud and air had become indistinguishable. It was not darkness, but something quieter, a place where light and shadow had forgotten to differ. Each window I passed held a fragment of persistence, small scenes surviving the retreat of time. A dining room where an unfinished meal waited beneath cooling light. A portrait whose painted eyes glimmered faintly, seeing through years of dust. A clock whose pendulum stood still, yet reflected the glow of its own arrested motion. Every glimmer was a testament, not to what remained, but to what refused to vanish completely. Nothing ever departed. It only grew quieter, more patient, waiting to be remembered. At the riverbank, the fog thinned into air. The water below, once restless, had calmed into a mirror of gray glass. It did not move, yet it breathed faintly, rippling where unseen current at the frozen skin of night. The frozen river that had long refused to freeze had finally surrendered to stillness, accepting the shape of its silence. Its surface reflected a dim glow, perhaps the promise of dawn not yet born. The world no longer seemed cold, only hushed, poised like the held breath before awakening. Faint music drifted from somewhere beyond the houses, a fragile tune from an old music box that turned unseen. Its melody wove through the last veils of mist, threading light and air together. It was a song that seemed older than memory, perhaps sung long before anyone thought to name it. The notes floated like snow not yet fallen, settling upon rooftops, windows, and the quiet river alike. The bridge appeared through the thinning air, glistening as if coated in silver. For a brief instant, a figure stood upon it, still and indistinct, a shape made of waiting. Its shadow trembled once, then melted into the gray. Whether it had ever been there seemed unimportant. What lingered was the sense of presence, of something unseen standing between the end of night and the beginning of dawn. The air seemed to pulse now, the whole valley breathing as one. The hills, the roofs, the river, even the fading lamplight shared a single rhythm, slow, steady, tender. Within that pulse lived every story the place had ever known. The train that never arrived, the letter that never reached its reader, the book that wrote itself, the frost that shaped forgotten faces. Each memory rested now, woven into the night's fabric, their edges softened by mist and mercy-alike, not the warmth of tea drifted faintly from an unseen window. No hands moved behind the glass, yet the scent lingered, fragrant, human, forgiving. It reached through the cold and settled like a memory upon the skin. It was the smell of home, of survival, of small rituals that held the world together when everything else dissolved. The thought rose gently that even the act of holding warmth, of lighting a single lamp, was a kind of remembrance, a vow whispered without sound. The mist shifted again, then sighed, folding back upon itself like cloth laid to rest. It wrapped the town in a final embrace, covering the streets, the bridges, the roofs. The lamps dimmed, their glow deepening into amber, then fading into gray. The snow that had been waiting at the edge of the clouds seemed to hesitate, as though the stillness itself had become enough dot, and then the mist slept. Its last breath lingered in the hollow between buildings, soft as silk, before vanishing. The streets blurred into one quiet expanse, the edges between stone and sky erased. The frost upon the windows turned to water, then to nothing. Only silence remained, vast and tender. The town's heartbeat slowed, then softened into peace. The hours no longer asked to be counted. They simply were weightless, circular, whole. The air tasted faintly of pine and old tea, the final traces of human warmth. Somewhere within that calm, memory settled into itself, content to wait until another dream called it awake. Not the night no longer sought meaning. It had found rest instead. The world exhaled, and so did I. Some nights do not need snow to be beautiful. Some nights need only stillness, the kind that carries warmth even through frost, the kind that remembers without words. Beneath the quiet, the valley breathed on, patient and eternal, waiting for the next dream to begin.